A ministry of ungentlemanly warfare from the archives. One of the most extraordinary stories of World War II. In the bleak moments after defeat in 1940, Winston Churchill knew that Britain had to strike back hard, no holds barred. Churchill called for the development of a completely new form of warfare, recruiting a band of eccentric freethinkers to become the world's first deniable secret operatives, and offering these volunteers little but a blaze of glory and all but certain death. I ought to tell this incredible true story of the daring victories scored by this small band of freelance pirates undertaking devastatingly effective missions against the Nazis and breaking all the rules of war. Led by the wild British eccentric Gus March Phillips, but increasingly commanded by the fearsome Danish Viking Anders Lasse, who was awarded the Military Cross with 2 bars and the Victoria Cross. He is pictured right at their secret Turkish pirate base. The Maid Honour. There comes out of the sea from time to time a band of steel which plucks the German sentries from their posts with growing efficiency. That was Winston Churchill's view. Even as the crew of the Maid Honour awaited a seemingly deadly confrontation, a power struggle was playing out at the highest level in London, and all concerning the diminutive vessel's daring mission. As the British Expeditionary Force had retreated from the French beaches, so Churchill had issued an extraordinary order to his chiefs of staff: prepare hunter troops for a butcher and bolt reign of terror. Under Churchill's order, the British military was tasked to do something that didn't come naturally to it: to raise a raiding force to strike the enemy in hit-and-run attacks using all possible measures. Every man aboard the Maid Honour was one of Churchill's volunteers for special duties, and March Phillips had been given absolute power to pick and choose his men. March Phillips' authority flowed not from the regular armed forces, but from an organisation born of Churchill's iron will and formed in the shadows. In the summer of 1940, Churchill had given the green light for the founding of the highly secretive Special Operations Executive. Its remit went far beyond butcher and bolt raiding. Its mission was to set ablaze enemy-held Europe and the wider world, launching subversion and sabotage missions where possible. The neutral harbour. Officially, the SOE didn't exist, and neither did its agents nor its missions, which meant anything was possible. The Maid Honour's key crew, March Phillips, Appleyard, Hayes and Lassen, had been exhaustively checked and vetted and contracted to utmost secrecy prior to their departure for Africa. They all signed the Official Secrets Act. Brigadier Colin McVean Gubbins, the SOA's Operations and Training Director, better known as M, the previous year he fought a guerrilla war in Norway, blowing up bridges, sabotaged railway lines, mined tracks, and generally spread as much destruction and mayhem as possible. He thought the Maid Honour's mission fitted the bill. M had run up against some spirited opposition from the British military, and Churchill's foremost political adversaries, the Royal Navy, had even managed to get them banned from all European theatres of operations, but not from Africa. The target of the tiny Q ship, now becalmed off the coast of West Africa, lay some 2,000 miles eastwards on the small Spanish colonial territory, an island nation of Fernando Po, now called Bioko, lying in the Gulf of Guinea. It possessed Santa Isabel Harbour, where Britain feared was being used as a covert resupply for German U-boats stoking Allied shipping along the African coast. Spain's government under General Franco was seen as being neo-fascist, an enthusiastic, secretive supporter of the Axis powers. During the Spanish Civil War, Italian troops fought with Franco's forces, and German Stuka guide bombers provided devastating air support. In short, while Spain paid lip service to her much vaunted neutrality, Fernando Po's Santa Isabel port was a clandestine German U-boat refueling and rearming depot. 3 enemy ships, one flying the German swastika, one the Italian flag, and the modern German tugboat, the 200-ton Licombe, which went to the aid of crippled U-boats and towed them to supposedly neutral harbour. Operation Postmaster. The plan involved March Phillips sailing his ship into Santa Isabel Harbour under the cover of darkness, where they would overpower the ship's crew, seize the vessels, blow their anchor chains, and spirit them away to one of the nearest British ports, lying some 1,500 miles across the Gulf of Guinea. If spotted, the maid honour would appear as an unidentifiable fishing trawler. If she was captured, this was to be avoided at all costs. The boat might still maintain the bluff of being of Swedish origin. If any of the crew were taken alive, death was considered preferable. They all carried what was nicknamed Holy Communion, a hidden suicide pill to be taken if captured. Such a mission appeared impossible. If March Phillips was successful, Churchill needed to be able to deny absolutely all knowledge and culpability. There needed to be a plausible explanation as to how on earth 2 German and 1 Italian ships had fallen into British hands. Working closely with Ian Fleming, then SOE's liaison at the Admiralty, M set about coming up with just such a ruse. The British destroyer HMS Violet, stationed in the West African port of Lagos in Nigeria, would steam into the Gulf of Guinea to intercept the 3 vessels once they had been cut out of port. Once the 3 ships had been seized, the captain of HMS Violet was to send a coded radio message. Postmaster successful. That would trigger the next stage of the cover story, to be orchestrated from London. The BBC would broadcast a story in English, Spanish and Portuguese. It would detail how 3 enemy vessels had been intercepted by a Royal Navy warship. The crews had mutinied due to poor pay and conditions in Fernando Po, and the vessels had been seized as prizes of war. A close call. On Hitler's orders, captured SOE operatives were to be shown no mercy. After unspeakable torture, they were to be hung using piano wire to make their deaths as slow and degrading as possible. As the maid honour lay becalmed, with a fast warship approaching, her crew feared they were about to face the dreaded piano wire death. The maid honour is shown top right and Santa Isabel Harbour bottom right. Minute by minute, the powerful battle cruiser bore down upon the diminutive Q ship. Then they spotted the distinctive form of the white ensign fluttering from the ship's rigging, a red St. George's cross against a white background, with the Union Jack set in one corner. That finally decided it. She had to be of British origin. A yell of relief echoed across the maid honour's deck. March Phillips' entry in the ship's log typically downplays the moment. 4:30 p.m. Hove 2 boarded and questioned. English. A heavily armed party boarded the Q ship and their captain questioned the crew. March Phillips was able to satisfy the commander to such a degree that they were all invited aboard the British battleship. Hot baths, drinks and a supply of fresh food were provided to the 5 hardy seamen before they went their separate ways. The odds were astronomical. Maid Honour finally made it to their destination port, Lagos Harbour, in the British colonial territory of Nigeria. They had completed an epic journey of over 3,000 nautical miles. Their target destination, Fernando Po, lay 400 miles east across the Gulf of Guinea. Santa Isabel Harbour and the 3 enemy ships were well within their grasp. 6 more stalwarts were flown to Lagos to reinforce the Operation Postmaster crew. The 11 crew were boosted by a further 6 SOE agents, making 17 in all. One of those, Agent W10, Leonard Guise, wasn't trained to kill, but he excelled in the subtle arts of subterfuge, trickery and deception. In fact, he was a liar. The more March Phillips studied the targets and the harbour defences, it became clear that the Maid Honour could sneak into the harbour, but it couldn't tow them away. To steal a ship like the Duchess of Dorset would need a tugboat to drag her out of the harbour. The same was true of the Lycombe and the yacht next to her. Fortunately, there were vessels in Lagos Harbour that could do the job. The British tugboat, the Vulcan, captained by Tugmaster Croker, was ideal, so the Operation Postmaster plan was rewritten. The Vulcan would be used to tow out the Duchess de Costa, and a smaller tugboat, the Nunny, would haul off the Lycombe. Thereafter, the tugs would tow their charges to the planned rendezvous with the British destroyer HMS Violet, at which stage Britain could formally seize the vessels and their mutinous crew. A second SOE agent, W25 Richard Lippert, was dispatched to Fernando Po with a special mission. Under cover of being a businessman working for the Santa Isabel office of the British Trading Company, John Holtz, he was to discover some means which he could spirit the Italian and German officers off their respective ships on the night of the assault. Without their officers to lead them, it was hoped the ship's crew would surrender. Almost ready. The first thing that Lippert saw was a means to neutralise Governor Sorrells, the Spanish overseer of Fernando Po. The method the SOE hit upon was the tried and tested means of blackmail. He had a local mistress, so they photographed him stark naked in an upstairs bathroom showering his mistress. Once the governor was confronted with the compromising photographs, he agreed immediately to stop surveillance of the British. He was even persuaded to allow overflights of the harbour using his private aircraft for the supposed purposes of taking photos of its scenic beauty. These photos were sent back to Lagos to be used to brief March Phillips and his team. From the images, the exact location of the 3 vessels was plotted, as were the key buildings ranged around the harbour, at which the Spanish defenders, with their machine guns and 4-inch cannons, were stationed. Lippert organised a dinner at one of Santa Isabel's best restaurants, to which all notables in the local community, ships officers included, were invited. They also invited the doctor, a notable German resident, Heinrich Löhr, unwittingly giving him SOE funds to pay for the party. Lippert and Guise had accounted for 2 absolutely vital elements of Operation Postmaster. Without those elements being in place, M and all SOE chance of success. And in one last crucial act of preparation, the team of licensed-to-kill agents went to a settlement called Olokameji, a secret SOE school training black Africans in guerrilla warfare. The Operation Postmaster Plan called for the anchor chains to be blown from the ship side as opposed to the shore, so that none of the raiding force ever set foot upon Spanish soil. All systems go. While M and his political taskmasters in London still felt it worth the risk, two powerful commanders remained unconvinced. Admiral Willis and General Gifford repeatedly cabled London and made it clear that they did not, repeat not, agree operation should take place. When London issued categorical orders that the raid should go ahead, Admiral Willis acquiesced and greenlit the Royal Navy's part in the mission, but General Gifford, the more obdurate of the two, refused to supply the extra 17 men that were needed, but the Governor of Niagara, Sir Bernard Henry Bodillon, a 58-year-old veteran of World War I, was happy to supply the toughest individuals in the public service in Nigeria. SOE agent guys described the new recruits thus: as choice a collection of thugs as Nigeria can ever have seen. Their cover story was they had been called away for 2 weeks' leave, and they would only learn the truth once they had departed on the tugboats for Fernando Po. So it was that 34 raiders readied themselves for departure. March Phillips finally had his assault force ready. He received a telegram from Brigadier Gubbins, better known as M, to the assembled SOE agents. It read, "Good hunting. I'm confident you will exercise utmost care to ensure success and obviate repercussions. Best of luck to you and all maid honour and others. Signed M." All that remained now was to set sail and execute the cut-out mission. There was little time for training and no time to delay. The assault was to go ahead under cover of a waning moon, when the night would be at its darkest. Things go smoothly. In spite of his Danish crew member's youth and his borderline madness, March Phillips was glad to have Lassen in his number, a loner, possessed of a self-belief that often made him appear arrogant. He was a natural-born warrior and a leader of men. They had grown close, and Lassen would be the first to board the Duchess d'Aosta. The darkness was so intense that Hayes and Winter, the lead boarding party, could barely see their hands in front of their faces. Dipping their paddles in the still water, Hayes and Winter set out. After 5 minutes paddling, they were alongside the Bibundi, the yacht tied to the side of the larger German ship. But as they did, a torchlight pierced the darkness, and a voice said, "Who goes there? Identify yourselves." No sooner had the watchmen realised they were staring down the gaping barrels of 2 45 caliber machine guns. They sprinted forward and dived off the Licumber's bows, making for land some 50 yards away, where they could raise the alarm. Hayes, the boarding force commander, had no time to worry about that now. The 4 men surged aboard the largest ship, Hayes and Winter making a beeline for the anchor chains. Each had a rucksack bulging with pre-made explosive charges. They bent to their task fore and aft as the 2 district commissioners hurried through the length of the vessel, Tommy guns and Koshies at the ready. To their rear, the Nuneaton closed in, inching her way alongside. With the first target ship declared clear of enemy forces, the tow rope had to be attached, ready for the getaway. Charges set, Hayes and Winter steeled themselves to wait for the appointed moment so they could blow the anchor chains as the main assault force surged across the decks of the Duchessa d'Aosta. Smoothly goes it. Hayes was tempted to cut the Bibundi free, but in the main cabin his fellow raider, Winter, discovered damning evidence as to the vessel's identity. Photos of the Bibundi flying a swastika, with a lady, presumably the owner's wife, posing beside it. Winter whispered, "Let's take her, Graham," showing Hayes the photo. Hayes agreed that Bibundi deserved to be seized as a prize of war. Just a few hundred feet to the east of the Lecumber lay the massive form of the Duchessa d'Aosta. Indeed, the entire expanse of the U-shaped harbour was little more than 3,000 yards across. The first explosion on the Lecumber flashed across the compact confines of the bay. The punching roar of the blast thundering across the Italian vessel's decks. Aboard the Vulcan, Anders Lassen, as always armed to the teeth, heard and felt the blast's power. As he tensed himself to jump, beside him were Appleyard and March Phillips. Even before the Vulcan bumped alongside the Duchess d'Aosta, the nimble form of Lassen made the leap, a line grasped in one hand and his free hand making a grab for the ship's rope ladder. As his feet made contact with the rungs, a second explosion from the Lecumber threw a blaze of light across the bay. The sure-footed Lassen looped the line around the ship's bollard, tossed the loose end back through the darkness towards the Vulcan's bridge. "Pull, pull, Robin, pull like hell." Robin Duff, the Vulcan's second in command, grabbed the line, dragged it tight and made it fast. Hold fast," he cried back to Lassen. Finally, the British tugboat and the biggest prize, the Italian liner-cum-cargo ship, were lashed together. Looking good. The explosions that thundered across the harbour had taken the diners on the casino restaurant terrace by complete surprise. No amount of drunken singing could drown out a blast that was powerful enough to sever a steel anchor hawser. The momentary burst of light was gone in an instant. As blackness returned to the water, it was the frantic bugle call ringing out across the harbour from Government House that alarmed Capitan Specht. Figures rushed to man the machine guns positioned on the roof, but until the gunners could see properly to assess the threat, they were at a loss as to who or what they should open fire at. After all, if this was an attack from the air, it would make sense to keep the town in darkness. On the Nuneaton's bridge, Lieutenant Goodman ordered his stokers to pile on the power. His tug took up the strain and moments later, all three ships were underway, moving towards the safe channel leading through the harbour entrance and into the open sea. The route steered by the Nuneaton would take her close to the Vulcan. As a smaller tug steamed past, Graham Hayes caught sight of the party on the Duchess's bows. Readying themselves to blow the forward anchor chain, Graham shouted, "We've got 'em, Apple, we've got 'em." Appleyard's reply echoed back from the Duchess's bows, equally high-spirited and in English, "Head for the open sea." The Italian crew, many still in their pyjamas, were corralled on the open deck, face down where they could be covered with the raiders' Tommy guns. No quarter given, no mercy shown. If one man cried out a warning to the shore, now thick with watching eyes, the consequences would be disastrous. Problems. All around the quay, total confusion reigned. It was unbelievable. Almost 10,000 tons of German and Italian shipping was being spirited away beneath their very noses. It was fast becoming clear that Operation Postmaster had been successful beyond anyone's wildest imaginings. As the 5 ships powered past the buoys that marked the exit to the harbour and turned towards the open sea, the raid had taken just 35 minutes to execute. Captain Specht was spitting blood. He marched into the British consulate and came face to face with Peter Lake, Britain's vice-consul in Fernando Po. Specht let fly with a string of foul-mouthed curses. Lake replied, "Get out, this is British sovereign territory." Specht lost control and punched Lake in the face, which gave the 26-year-old SOE agent, Lake, the excuse he needed, and he proceeded to knock 7 bells out of the German captain, who eventually stared down the barrel of a revolver. Specht promptly collapsed, split his trousers and soiled what was left of them. Police were called and Specht was thrown into jail. Stage 1 of the Operation Postmaster was complete. A 5-star gold-plated cut-out operation. But Stage 2, in which the British had to formally seize the ships, was yet to be executed. Matters took a turn for the worse when the Nuneaton suffered engine trouble. The Vulcan ploughed onwards, but the flotilla of 3 smaller ships fell further and further behind. Unfortunately, March Phillips had reached the rendezvous point only to discover that HMS Violet was nowhere to be seen. His only option was to press onwards, west towards Lagos, the nearest British port. The only problem was the Nuneaton, with her 2 German ships in tow, was nowhere to be seen. Churchill was unrepentant. On January 19th, 5 days after the raid, HMS Violet's commander, Lieutenant Nicholson, cabled a short message. "I've intercepted Duchessa d'Aosta. I've placed prize crews aboard without opposition. Escorting to Lagos unless otherwise ordered." In theory, March Phillips, Appleyard, Lassen and their raider cohorts were under arrest, as were the mutinous Italian crew. It wasn't until January 21st that the Vulcan and the Duchess d'Aosta reached Lagos. As chance would have it, the Nuneaton and her 2 charges would also arrive about the same time. March Phillips sent a telegram to London informing M of the success of the mission. In a most secret report submitted to M and others, 5 days after March Phillips' flotilla reached Lagos harbour, Caesar, Lieutenant Colonel Julius Hanau, M's deputy at the SOE, sounded an exultant note of triumph. "Now that Postmaster is in the bag, I feel you may care to have the enclosed record of its romantic and dramatic career set out chronologically from its early days until the climax was reached." Appleyard and Hayes were both promoted to captain, and in the SOE's signature way, Lassen was directly appointed a 2nd lieutenant. The pips simply sewn onto his uniform. Lassen laughingly explained to one of his fellow raiders, "They just gave the pips to me." Winston Churchill was delighted at the raid's outcome, while there was widespread dismay expressed by rival politicians and amongst the top brass at the piratical and un-British nature of the operation. Churchill, though, was unrepentant. Together with her cargo, the Duchessa d'Aosta was valued at £300,000, which would build 23 Spitfires. Channel Islands surrendered in June 1940. To prepare for cross-channel sorties, the SSRF, a small-scale raiding force, was assigned a new base, a country house called Anderson Manor, lying on the banks of the Winterbourne River in North Dorset. Under the heading Bow and bow and arrow use in modern warfare, Lassen petitioned the Home Office to be allowed to develop it as the ultimate silent killing machine. He listed its advantage. 1. The arrow is soundless. The arrow kills without shock or pain, so it is unlikely that a man would scream after being hit. An archer can shoot 15 shots a minute. The arrow is as deadly as a bullet, and he was a master of the bow and arrow. The SSRF were about to launch Operation Dryad, their debut raid in Europe. They were allocated 2 mortar torpedo boats, MTBs, one of which was difficult to detect from land. Made by shipbuilders Thornycroft, she'd been nicknamed Little Pisser, LP, due to the continuous bubbling noise made by her submerged exhaust. The plan for Operation Dryad involved an SSRF team crossing the Channel in LP, kidnapping the Germans garrisoning Les Cascades, one of the most northerly points of the Channel Islands, and leaving the place in total ruins. It was used as a signal station for the German Navy, a real strategic value target. It was shortly after midnight when March Phillips led his men over the western perimeter wall. They split into 4 groups. 1. Take the lighthouse tower. 2. Hit the accommodation block. 3. Secure the engine building. 4. Hit the all-important radio room. Armed with Tommy guns, all the groups were successful, and the radio room was an Aladdin's cave. German code books, notebooks full of information and instructions, plus signal pads, wireless diaries and logs, usable intelligence. Another success. By the time all the garrison had been rounded up, the raiders had netted 5 Navy men, including Chief Petty Officer Munt, plus 4 Army men guarding the remote outpost. Position secure. They made a thorough search and anything of intelligence value was taken. Ration books, identity cards, the station log, plus personal letters and photos. Everything was loaded up as the raiders prepared to make their getaway. But their final act was to smash all the German radio sets with an axe. March Phillips ended with 20 shadowy figures. There was no room in the boat for the purloined weaponry, so it was tossed into the depths. They had abducted the entire garrison of Les Cascades. After the success of Operation Postmaster, Operation Dryad was as fitting a follow-up as they could have wished for. The raiders had a 2-hour crossing ahead of them. By the time LP rounded Portland Bill, the jubilant raiders had dressed themselves in assorted items of captured German uniform, including the soldiers' distinctive helmets, and Lassen thought they might use this disguise on future raids, and Lassen, with his Danish and Polish comrades fluent in German, surely they could use these uniforms on future raids. At 400 hours, the prisoners were handed direct to military intelligence, M19. Lord Louis Mountbatten decreed there should be a cross-channel raid every 2 weeks to demoralise and terrorise the German forces. The SSRF was involved in several other cross-channel missions, including some vicious nighttime skirmishes with the enemy, as well as clandestine probing of their defences. But now they began preparing for the mission that would truly cross the line. Operation Aquatint. They planned to target mainland France, landing on the coastline at the village of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, known in the D-Day landings to come as Omaha Beach. It was heavily weathered defending. It finally got the go-ahead in September 1942, when Anders Lassen was off on a rare weekend's leave with his girlfriend. On that fateful night, March Phillips would feel the absence of his Viking raider as never before. On the night of September 12-13, 1942, Operation Aquitaine went ahead without Lassen. It turned out to be an unmitigated disaster. Little Pisser took them to the French coast, yet failed to find the designated cliff. Instead, they emerged from their boat onto a stretch of open sand. The night was as black as pitch, but luck was against them. A heavily armed German patrol stumbled into the British raiders. In the bloody firefight that ensued, one raider was so badly injured that he had to be left behind. The remaining 10 made it back to their boat, but German machine guns tore it to pieces. 11 men had gone ashore, none would return. 3 were dead, 4 on the run, and the rest, badly injured, were captured. Captain Graham Hayes would make it as far as supposedly neutral Spain, only to be betrayed by the Spanish, who handed him to the Germans. Hayes was incarcerated in the infamous fortress prison of Fresnes, in solitary confinement and undergoing savage beatings, semi-drowning in icy baths, and whipping by oxfoot lashes, stiffened with steel rods. Hayes never broke, nor gave anyone away. 2 of Graham's friends, the Pole or Obchaczynski, and a Dutchman, Jan Hellings, were sent to Stalag 133. At some stage, they either died or were executed on Hitler's orders. Operation Basalt. Among those who lost their lives was Major Gus March Phillips, DSO. The founder and visionary leader, Graham Hayes, prisoner, and Orr Opatinsky, plus the Frenchman Desgrange, the wearer of the piratical headscarf in Operation Postmaster, were also gone. Leaderless and rudderless, this was the unit's darkest hour. Lieutenant Appleyard, MC with Barr, was appointed leader of the force, and barely 2 weeks after Aquitaine, they were in action again on Operation Basalt. It was the night of October 3rd, when 13 set sail in Little Pisser to seek revenge for the friends they had lost. The target was Sark, a small, heavily populated channel island, heavily garrisoned with machine gun nests and minefields, covering every venue of approach. The German garrison was reinforcing its defences. The SSRF's mission was to infiltrate these defences, raid an enemy billet and seize as many prisoners as possible. LP ploughed through the darkened seas at 2300 hours, with Lieutenant Freddie Bourne at the MTB's wheel. He crept under the lee of the cliffs, dropped anchor and cut the engine. The Sark garrison outnumbered the raiders 20 to 1. Their first target was Last Jesperlev, a large detached house and a billet of several Germans, but the only occupant turned out to be a lady in her 40s, Mrs. Frances Pittard. Reacted well to the fearsome-looking raiders storming her house. She was the daughter of a Royal Navy commander, and of course was willing to help. She showed Appleyard the key enemy positions on a Sark map. Before leaving, Appleyard offered Mrs. Pittard a safe passage to England. She refused, just a few hundred yards away, between their present position and the nearby Dick's Cart Hotel. With barely a sound, the raiders slipped into the wooded valley below, flitting between the trees towards the hotel grounds. Hitler was apoplectic. British will be ruthlessly wiped out, he said. Lassen went forward to check out the lie of the land. He spotted one single sentry who who Lassen dispatched with his trusty blade, signalling the others to come forward. He surged across the lawn and burst through the main door to the annex. It was deserted. The door opened off the corridor. On a word of command, they kicked open the doors and found 5 Germans fast asleep in their beds. They were all engineers, working on the harbour defences. All useful documents were gathered up and the prisoners frog marched outside, but one of them made a break for it. Chaotic scenes unfolded as all the prisoners made a bid to escape. The alarm had well and truly been raised. A shot rang out. There were bangs and crashes of doors being thrown open as orders rang out in German. Meanwhile, Appleyard led his men, plus their one remaining prisoner, in a helter-skelter descent of the cliff, arriving on the shore at 0300 hours. The boat was waiting for them. They bundled the German aboard with 13 men crammed into the little boat. They all paddled furiously, and they made it to the comparative safety of the MTB without a shot being fired. Bourne slipped anchor and made haste for the open sea. 3 hours later, LP Dr. Poland, the lone prisoner, was handed over to M19 for interrogation, and the raiders headed back to Anderson Manor. The raid was seen as a success. They grabbed a German captive, plus bundles of intelligence materials. They'd also killed half a dozen Germans. Yet the aftermath of Operation Basalt left the German hierarchy thirsting for blood. 2 days after the attack, the headlines in the Guernsey Evening Star said, "British attack and bind German troops in Sark. Immediate reprisal for the disgraceful episode." Honours for Sark and the badge of the SAS. Appleyard received a DSO. Patrick Dudgeon an MC, as did Anders Lassen, in recognition of his role in the still top secret Operation Postmaster. Plus the Channel Island raids that followed. Lord Louis Mountbatten said Lassen is an inspiring leader, a brilliant seaman, possessed of sound judgment and quick decisions. On February 8, 1943, Lassen flew to Cairo to join the 1st SAS Regiment, as it was formerly known. Shortly after his arrival, Appleyard followed by sea, bringing with him 50 of the remaining SSRF men. A small group was left at Anderson Manor, as the unit was effectively part of the larger SAS. In its formative years, the SAS was a unit with a certain distinctive dash and possessed its own unmistakable cap badge, one designed by David Sterling. It showed a white dagger with the words "Who Dares Wins" superimposed beneath it. The badge was worn with the distinctive set of parachutist wings. The soon-to-be famous SAS insignia got its formal blessing from the Commander-in-Chief of the Middle East Theatre, General Claude Auchinleck, who saw Sterling wearing it and said, "Good heavens, Sterling, what's that you have on your shirt?" Sterling replied, "Our operational wing, sir." Auchinleck murmured, "Well, well, very nice too, very nice too." Sadly, David Sterling hardly got to wear the iconic badge for long, as in January 1943, just weeks prior to Lassen and the rest of the SSRF contingent joining his unit, Sterling was captured during a raid in North Africa. He spent the rest of the war in captivity and would end up being incarcerated in Colditz in an effort to try and foil his repeated escape attempts. Lassen was quick with his fists. Earl Jellicoe, the son of the Earl Jellicoe, former Admiral of the fleet, became the overall commander of the amphibious element of the Special Forces, while the land-based arm of the SAS fell under the command of another towering Special Forces legend, Robert Blaine Maine, better known to all simply as Paddy. When Sterling had invited Maine to become one of his 6 founding SAS officers, Maine had little choice. It was either that or face a court-martial. He was under close arrest after knocking out his commanding officer. Lassen was likewise known to be quick to anger and quick with his fist. In time, he'd flattened his new commanding officer, Earl Jellicoe, throwing a punch from out of the blue in a Tel Aviv bar. Jellicoe said, "I think I must have said something that annoyed you. I wasn't aware of it, except the next thing, I was flat on my back on the floor. I must have been out for quite a bit. We had a few more drinks and drove back to my camp. He was too valuable a person for me to make too much of a fuss about it." While he was an inspired leader of men, Lassen was a force of nature, wild and unstoppable. In the very first upcoming raid, he was proved his destructive powers as if a hurricane had been unleashed on the enemy. Operation Husky was masterminded by the Allied High Command as a means to penetrate Europe via her southern underbelly and to thrust north towards Berlin. The stepping stone into southern Europe was to be Sicily, and in order to take Sicily, Crete needed to be wrested from German and Italian control, or at the very least, the warplanes stationed at her air bases had to be put out of action. The training regime at Athlete. The base for Jellicoe's amphibious raiding force was at Athlete, in what was then Palestine, in the far north of modern-day Israel. As training got underway, Jellicoe had under his command 130 officers and men, but his force would expand to several hundred strong as operations intensified. Jellicoe said we wanted self-reliant men with initiative and self-discipline, not the imposed discipline of the barrack square. I sought self-starters, men not dependent on an officer telling them what to do. Dubbed the Killer School, the main aim was to prepare them for the physical and psychological rigours of what lay ahead, as small raiding forces went into battle against larger formations of regular German and Italian troops. Recruits went into the Killer School in batches of 30, being told, when you burst into a room full of enemies, you must remember, shoot the first man who moves, hostile or not, next shoot the man nearest to you. It was June 1943 when the raid on the Cretan air bases named Operation Alderman got the final go-ahead. Command would fall to David Sutherland, Jellicoe's number 2. The targets were 3 Cretan bases, Timbaki, Heraklion and Castelli. Each was to be hit with one group of raiders. A, B and C patrols were selected. Lassen was in charge of C patrol. Sleep by day, travel by night. The task before the raiders was made all the more difficult in that each patrol was supposed to hit its target on the same night. To maximise supplies, D-Day for the mission was in just 12 days. When Allied forces had been driven out of Crete in 1941, the British left behind a scattering of men to organise the Cretan resistance. Their honorary guerrilla leader, Major Paddy Lee Fermor, disguised as a shepherd named Michaelis, had survived for nearly 2 years. In among the calm and the thick, inky darkness, a pair of rubber-hulled boats nosed into the rocky shore, Lassen leaping out of one, Lamonby from the other. A voice called out softly from the shadows. It was Gregorius and Rakis, one of Lee Firma's top men, who offered Lassen a bone-crunching greeting. At first, Lassen and Lamonby's patrols marched together, for the two air bases lay a dozen miles apart. The first casualty wasn't long in coming. One of the men on Lamonby's patrol suffered a twisted ankle, so his massive pack was carried in turn by the others. The terrain was crawling with the enemy forces. At a Poyni village, Lamonby's patrol continued north towards Heraklion Aerodrome, while Lassen swung northeast to Castelli Air Base. At Aponi, Gregorius went with Lamonby, and Vasilis Cronius joined Lassen's patrol, supplementing their packed food stocks with tins of corned beef, bread, hard-boiled eggs, and Cretan wine. But he also returned with news. The Germans were scouting all the Cretan settlements, and they knew if they were caught, they were prime candidates for Hitler's commando order to be annihilated to the last man. The witching hour. By the time they reached Castelli Airfield, Lassen's party was on the brink of collapse. Only the Benzedrine tabs keeping their bruised and battered bodies going. The garrison was reportedly 100 strong plus air crew, ground crew and auxiliaries, firefighters, air traffic controllers. Up against those sort of numbers, Lassen's four-men raiding party was outnumbered 30 to 1 and would be heavily outgunned. 12 miles northwest, Lamonby's B Patrol was facing its own problems. The area was crawling with the enemy. They could see 200 German soldiers drilling in the village below. But 2 miles to the west, there was a massive fuel and ammunition dump. Thousands of drums of precious aviation fuel. Lamonby decided that was their target. Lassen got a close look at the base facilities. The defences were intimidating. To the north, some 3,000 German troops were stationed at the village of Castelli Pediata. To the south, 300 German and Italian troops were billeted in Muktari village. Back at their cave base, Lassen split his force into two. Nicholson and Greaves would attack from the east, hitting the fuel and ammo dumps. Lassen and Jones would attack from the west, a diversion. Cruelly barbed, this was what Lassen and Jones now faced. Coils of high-grade wire, which was extremely difficult to cut, the forerunner of modern razor wire. As they were engaged cutting the damaged wire, a sentry on the opposite side lit a cigarette and stood there scanning the fence. Lassen reached for his Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, moved silently as a wraith, stealing through the shadows and killed the sentry, the first to die that night. As they skirted around the hangar-like building, they heard voices from inside. Soon now, Lassen and Jones would shake them out of their cosy reverie. Hell breaks loose. To the east, Nicholson and Greaves snipped the first strands of the damaged wire, then froze as the searchlight swept over them. They froze every time the intense white light flashed by and cut their way through undetected. They crept across to a ghostly silhouette. It was a Fi-156 Storch. Nicholson pulled out the first of his charges, a Lewis bomb, a stodgy lump of what resembled bread dough, but it was plastic explosive mixed with thermite gunpowder that was placed on the fuel tanks. In the far shadows, Nicholson spotted a Ju-87 Stuka. He led Greaves towards the Stuka and reached up to a place in a Lewis bomb when he heard the sudden dull crack of a low-velocity bullet echoing across the airstrip. It sounded like a single pistol shot. It came from the west, and Nicholson knew it meant that Lassen was in action. Having felled the German sentry, Lassen had thrown caution to the wind. He was going at it hammer and tongs with a scavenged German machine gun. Jones hurried to a final target, a shell bomber. Lewis bomb set, he ran to link up with Lassen. The Dane unleashed a final savage burst with the machine gun. Then they ran for the gap they had cut in the fence. Just then there was a massive boom from behind them. One of the warplanes dissolved in a seething fountain of flame. Two further blasts followed in quick succession as a Stuka writhed under the impact of the Lewis bombs, followed an instant later by the hollow whoomp of the fuel tanks exploding. Almost at the same time, a massive eruption of fire fisted skywards towards the east of the base from the direction of the ammunition dumps and the fuel store. With all the gunfire erupting at Lassen's end of the operation, the Germans had rushed their troops to that side of the airbase, leaving Nicholson and Greaves with a clear run at things. In fact, Nicholson was convinced that Lassen and Jones had either been captured or most likely killed. How could anyone survive the volume of fire in the western side of the airbase? Chaos and confusion. At first all went well. Holmes hurried ahead, and to the left and right he planted the first of his charges under the metal drums, and he pushed out to the perimeter and did the same again. At 100 hours, the first of the charges went off. The resulting cataclysm was so intense that streams of burning fuel were blasted through the bomb dump, setting off the explosives stored there. As a result, it too was blown sky high, the heavens above the fuel and ammo dump turning a terrible bloody red, and a massive pall of toxic oily smoke blotting out the stars. At Castelli Air Base, all was fiery chaos and confusion. Lassen and Jones were very much alive. They squirmed through a hole in the fence, but the way ahead was blocked. A phalanx of German troops was pouring onto the runway to hunt for whoever was blowing their airbase to smithereens. Slipping through the wire, Lassen headed for the vineyard that he knew lay somewhere close at hand. To his rear, the last Lewis bombs went up, punching through the heavy Caterpillar tractor's fuel tank. The vehicle lifted with the impact and slammed down onto the scorched and blackened ground in a seething mass of flames. On either side of the runway lay the skeletal remains of German aircraft, many with wings blown off, their carcasses burning fiercely. The fuel and ammunition dumps had been destroyed, as had several vehicles. Any number of the airbase garrison were dead, and many more were injured. To say that Lassen's mission had crippled the Luftwaffe operation on Castelli was something of an understatement. Lassen was forced to go to ground in the only patch of cover he could find, laid flat on his stomach in a farmer's cabbage field. You can see on the photograph Castelli Air Base was in ruins. Nicholson and Greaves were in no doubt that Lassen and Jones were finished. With barely a pause, they set off on the long trek that lay ahead. Behind them, Castelli Airfield was racked with further explosions and long bursts of gunfire. 12 kilometres north-east of Castelli Air Base, patrol beam was also in action. Their Creighton Bride Janny had and led them across the Heraclean road at just before midnight, but they were faced with a German officer and a fierce-looking German shepherd. Lassen carried the death of the Cretans in his heart. By now the enemy had begun to wreak their first bloody revenge. The German commander, based in nearby Heraclean town, had taken dozens of villagers hostage. He threatened to shoot them unless the foreign saboteurs, their blonde German-speaking leader first and foremost, were handed over. One by one the Nazis began to execute the villagers, but still none of the Cretans would talk. The executions left Lassen incandescent with rage. 62 Greeks shot, women and children in prison, 10 more to be shot daily until Lassen's capture. At dawn the following day, Nicholson and Greaves arrived, disguised as Cretan shepherds. They briefed Sutherland on all they had achieved, and so, as the faint hint of sunrise lightened the eastern sky, Sutherland's raiders sailed away from Crete, their ranks swollen with a dozen Cretan partisans, sadly minus one of their own, Lieutenant Lammonby. As the motor launch slipped into the darkness, his raiders had managed to escape from the encircling enemy, complete with their 2 German prisons. They left behind them a German airbase and fuel dump in smoking ruins. Even so, the execution of innocent Cretan villagers weighed heavily. This crime would not be forgotten. The night that they hit Castilian Heraclean, Operation Husky, and the Allied invasion of Sicily had begun. Its success at least partly due to the number of German warplanes destroyed at Castelli. Italian resistance on Sicily crumbled. The Allies thrust rapidly northwards onto the Italian mainland. By the start of September, the Italians had sued for peace, signing an armistice with the Allies on September 3rd, 1943. By the end of the second week of July, all by one of the maid honour founding fathers, March Phillips, Appleyard, Hayes, were dead. Only Lassen remained, and Lammonby had died in a local hospital. The Butcher of Crete. Lieutenant General Muller, the dreaded Butcher of Crete, was far from done yet. On September 14, 1943, he ordered his men to lay waste the entire region of Vianos. They were to execute all males over the age of 16. In response to that order, 2,000 German soldiers threw a wall of steel around the target area. Some 48 hours later, over 500 Cretans had been executed, plus 200 taken captive. Many of the villages, Kato Simic, Amaras, Efkos, Agios, Loutraki, Methoi, Christos had been burned to the ground. In short, Vianos was rendered into a ghost land. Jellicoe, Sutherland, Nicholson and Lassen all knew that the average German soldier was no more guilty in this war than the average Brit or Dane. They were conscripts, and they too were the victims of the Nazi regime. It was the senior commanders, those who blindly followed Hitler's will, those who ordered the massacre of hundreds of Cretan civilians, who took the lion's share of the blame. After Crete, Churchill issued orders to Jellicoe that his freelance pirates should do as had been done in coastal Europe. They should set the Aegean aflame. Jellicoe's raiders were to spread terror in the German ranks across the islands of the eastern Mediterranean. Yet at the same time, Churchill decreed that aid should go to the native villages, ground down under the Nazi jackboot, and so was born the concept of Hearts and Minds operations. The fame of the fearless blonde Viking warrior, who led many of those missions, drew locals to him. His fame spread like wildfire. So too did the fear he inspired in the hearts of senior German officers, those who had become Lassen's all-consuming target. One of them wrote to his commander a letter that was captured by the raiders. The British come like cats and disappear like ghosts. Next target. Jellicoe ordered his men to prioritise 3 targets. Just off the coast of Turkey, the island of Leros, with its seaplane base and floating submarine dock. Kos, with its 3 landing strips, plus the southernmost island, Simi, which would be the first hit, as it was seen as being the stepping stone to the others. All 3 were situated in the Dodecanese island chain, in the Aegean Sea, a stretch of water lying between Greece and Turkey. In the autumn of 1943, the islands remained Italian territory, populated by native Greeks. At the point of Haifa, Jellicoe, Sutherland, Lassen and their men were using cakes, those often ungainly looking 10 to 30 ton wooden fishing boats, powered mostly by sail. They were aiming to sneak past the enemy posing as Greek fishermen, or when circumstances demanded, they would fly the German or Italian flag. From the armed forces, they borrowed standard camouflage or scrim netting, scraps of cloth tied to the netting to suit the colouring and texture of the island shoreline. They sailed between Haifa and Athlete, testing out different combinations of scrim so as to break up the boat's outline. Next, they asked an area pilot to overfly one of the cakes they had camouflaged, to search for it with a naked eye and photograph its position. The pilot failed to spot the craft, and on the recce photographs it appeared like a continuation of the shoreline. New recruits were drawn to the gathering force. One was Porter Joe Jarrell, an American soldier who was chronically short-sighted Canadian American. Jellicoe had offered Jarrell an officer's commission, but he replied, "Thank you very much, sir, but I'd prefer to remain in the ranks." Italian surrender. Being a foreigner, Jarrell naturally fell into the Irish patrol, and another foreigner was Dion Stud-Stelling, and like Lassen, he was tall and blonde. He shared with the Dane an easy success with the ladies, hence the nickname Stud. He was a New Zealander, travelling to Britain in 1938. Knowing war was in the air, he joined the Durham Light Infantry. From there he drifted into Special Forces work. If nothing else, Stelling and Lassen would be united by the fact the Germans would put a price on both of their heads. The raid on Simi would launch the Dodecanese campaign, but in order to reach Simi, the flotilla would have to sail past the larger island of Rhodes, with its garrison of 40,000 German and Italian troops. 5 days after leaving Haifa, 2 cakes crept into Simi's darkened harbour. In 1943, the town was subject to a strict blackout. They passed a Greek cafe, its doors thrown open to the street. In whispers, Lassen and Pomfret talked to the locals and secured intelligence. 140 Italian soldiers on Simi, but no Germans. Nobody could tell Lassen how deep the harbour was. Frustrated, he jumped off the quayside, fully clothed, dived to the bottom. A few tense moments before Lassen's blonde hair bobbed to the surface, he yelled, "Pomfret, signal to the ships, it's deep enough." By the time the two cakes had come alongside and disgorged 40 raiders, word had reached the Italians that hundreds of British commandos had come ashore and taken Simi. Deciding that discretion was a better part of valour, the Italian commander decided not to put up any resistance. Lassen ordered him and his men to join the British, or he would hunt them all down and shoot them dead for cowardice. Safely ashore, the brig split his men into 4 patrols. Lassen's was sent to the highest point of Sydney town, preparing to fight. Over the coming days, the raiders reinforced their positions and wrecked the outlying islands. Lassen took his patrol around 3 in one day: Piscopi, Galci and Alimni, which possessed a deep harbour used by the Italians as a submarine base. They also found what they were looking for, an abandoned 20mm gun. More specifically, it was a Breeder Model 35 cannon, being accurate to a range of 5,000 feet. Mounted on a tripod, it could cover a 360-degree traverse, so in all directions, and it fired 240 rounds a minute. The Breeder was taken aboard the cake and transported back to Simi, where it was placed in a tower offering a panoramic view of the terrain below, including the sea to either side. The Italian troops remained decidedly shaken, but the 40-strong raiding force was itching for a fight. Yet before then, Lassen faced his own problems. He'd been sterilising a latrine using burning petrol when there was a blowback. Fire scorched both his lower legs badly. He also suffered a painful and debilitating infection of the intestine. Joe Jarrell, the American medic cum raider, said his injuries were so serious he should return to Cairo. Lassen refused to go. He got Jarrell to bandage the burns, and his desire to stay wasn't only due to his determination to remain with his fellow fighters. There were Germans hereabouts to fight. Lassen could sense that they were coming. By early October, the Brake's men had been in control of Simi for 2 weeks. Reinforcements had arrived in the form of 20 officers and men from the RAF 74 Squad Fighter Command. They were en route to Kos, one of the islands seized by Jellicoe's armada. The Viking rises to the challenge. At dawn on October 7th, 3 boatloads of German troops put ashore on Peggy Bay, east of Simi town. Manning the Breeder cannon that morning at the top of the tower was RAF Flight Sergeant Charlie Schofield, who, like Jarrell, was terribly short-sighted. Yet even Schofield had spotted the 3 craft. He opened fire. The German force scattered under the 20mm cannon fire. Lassen rallied his men to head the Germans off. The fierce percussions of the Breeder's fire brought 2 immediate misfortunes on Schofield. 1, it shattered his glasses. 2, it attracted a flight of Stuckers, which proceeded to dive bomb his castle-top position. In the winding streets, Lassen's Irish patrol was in action. O'Reilly noticed the Dane freeze by a wall. He had an uncanny sixth sense from finding the enemy, almost as if he could smell the Germans. On a signal, Lassen and O'Reilly burst into the open and fired at the Germans, who promptly surrendered, but a second patrol, led by Lieutenant Charles Binrose, pushed into eastern Sydney, where a German machine gun poured down fire on them. A stick grenade was tossed over a wall, exploding at the feet of Seaforth Islander William Morrison, who died from his wounds. So far, the 140-strong Italian garrison played little part in the fighting, so Lassen presented them with a stark choice. You may be shot by the Germans, but if you run, you will be shot by me. Lassen dashed up to the breeder cannon, took control and opened fire on the landing craft. Within moments, the 20mm armour-piercing rounds were tearing into the vessel. He kept at it until the ship's commander set course back to Rhodes. The battle for Sydney was finally over. The raiders withdrew. General Ulrich von Kleemann, the overall commander of Axis forces in the region, was furious when he heard about the defeat. He had 40,000 troops in Rhodes, yet a handful of British raiders and turncoat Italians had defeated him. He immediately ordered the island to be bombed into oblivion. At 0800 hours, the first flight of Stukas swept in, coming in at 5,000 feet. The Ju-87s plummeted in a 90-degree dive towards Earth. The first bomb was released at 400 metres above the target. Packed with 650 pounds of bombs, the Stuka was designed as a ground attack aircraft. But over Sydney, the bombing was indiscriminate and designed to terrorise the island population. Every 2 hours, a new wave of dive bombers swept in. Another of Le Brake's men, Lance Corporal McHenry, was killed. All across town there were civilian casualties as Sydney's ancient streets were torn apart. At dawn on October 10th, 3 days after the German assault force had been beaten back from the island, the Stukas returned in earnest. Wave after wave pounded the town. That morning, Le Brake received orders to withdraw. At first he resisted, although the suffering of the islanders was causing all the raiders, Lassen more than most, serious anguish. On October 12th, after further savage bombing sorties, the orders to withdraw were repeated. Finally, the raiders bowed to the inevitable and pulled out, and in leaving Sydney, they were saving the islands from any further death and devastation. Yet, even as he sailed away from Sydney Island, Anders Lassen was about to be called back into action again. A frustrated Viking. Lassen turned up in Italy, complete with a Volkswagen Kugelwagen, the open-top jeep-like vehicle used by the German military that he had purloined from the enemy. He also had with him the veterans of his Irish patrol, yet now that his wish had been granted, he'd got to join the big war. Lassen would find himself increasingly fettered by its rules and confounded by its regulations. One day, the British military police stopped him and confiscated his vehicle. They didn't seem to understand the concept of such things being seized as the booty of war. Dick Holmes remarked, "The rest of the British Army hated us. They disliked us intensely, no doubt about it. We were arrogant bastards. Walking around with scarves on, we carried guns. Most of us had the shoulder holsters, guns concealed in our pockets, little Berettas and stuff." One high-ranking officer declared to Lassen, "Your men are a disgrace. They're not even shaved. You haven't even shaved. What will the enemy think if they see you dead looking like that?" Lassen's hand went to the hilt of his Fairborn Sykes fighting knife. "Speak of me like that again, and I'll slit your throat." Gradually, bit by bit, Lassen's way of waging war was being eroded by an army high command who resented the special duty volunteers unique esprit de corps. Lassen had made it to the big war, chiefly due to a request by Brigadier Reginald Todd of the 2nd Special Service Brigade, a unit consisting of Royal Marine Commandos. The brigadier, who knew Lassen well, had seen an opening for him and his men in a forthcoming crucial operation, the attempt to break through German lines and kick-start the stalled Allied offensive. Lake Camacho. At the eastern end of the Bologna Plain lies the Lower Romagna, a flat, marshy coastal region, starting around Agenta and ended on Italy's eastern coast in the Adriatic Sea. Dikes, canals and many rivers crisscross this region. In the warmer months, it's a breeding ground for clouds of ferocious mosquitoes. Brigadier Todd saw an opening. If a force could cross the lake undetected and hit the enemy from the rear, although the sandspit separating the lake from the sea was heavily mined, that the spit would be there for the taking, and the north shore of the lake could be held to form a bridgehead. The Germans would be outflanked. Thus Lake Camacho was regarded as being the unlikely but vital point of breakthrough to kick-start the 8th Army Spring Offensive. What the brigadier needed was a comprehensive intelligence picture drawn up of the lake, its defences and the usual routes of ingress. There was only one unit with the experience, the skills, the bravery and the sheer goal to undertake such a mission. This was a job for Anders Lassen and his Irish patrol. The mission was codenamed Operation Roast. On the date of the assault, 1,000 heavily armed men would cross the lake undetected, and if the men of 9 Commando of Lassen's Irish patrol were caught, they would be annihilated. Mosquitoes feasted on their blood. In March, the Danish major broke away from the suffocating environment of everyone and their dog wanting to put their oar in. In the middle of a long speech by a colonel, Lassen rose sharply to his feet. "I go now," he announced. He busied himself on the lake with his men. As a result of these nighttime sorties, the large map on Brigadier Todd's headquarters became full of coloured pins. The whole unnecessary risks that Lassen was taking horrified many in his patrol. Porter Jarrow, Jack Nicholson, Sean O'Reilly, Martin Solomon, Dick Holmes, Stubb Stelling and Sammy Trafford had never seen him like this before. It was almost like he was actively seeking that dreadful death wish to be fulfilled. Their destination was the island of Casona-Gosta, 6 miles out on the lake. The crossing took most of the night. The raiders had to climb out of their heavily laden craft and carry them over stinking mud banks. When they finally reached the island, it was devoid of cover. They pulled their craft ashore. Then the exhausted men dug crude foxholes. By sunrise, the 60 men and their canoes on Casona-Agosta had apparently disappeared. They lay still and silent in their holes. Swarms of mosquitoes feasted on their blood. All day the men remained in their shallow holes, eating and sleeping where they lay. At nightfall they crawled out, uncovered their canoes, and the second stage of their infiltration began. The main island was devoid of the enemy. The little island where Stubb Stelling and his patrol were dug in suddenly saw 3 boatloads of Germans passing on the way to Casone Caldero. the main island. He let them pass before ordering his men to open fire. Rounds tore across the lake, shattering the tense stillness. The Viking takes charge. The Germans were caught in the crossfire from both islands. Just 5 Germans made it to Lassen's position alive. They turned out to be the Brandenburgers, elite troops that defended the islands. On hearing the howl of incoming artillery rounds, men dived into their foxholes. The horrific game of hide and seek with the German gunners carried on all morning. The Germans knew the lake was alive with their enemy now. With the commandos holding the islands, Lassen would have liked a further 48 hours to recce the terrain leading up to Comacchio town itself, but his orders were unequivocal. Come what may, Operation Roast was going ahead that night, yet Stelling was left with a strong impression that Lassen had a premonition that he was going to be killed. As a major, there was no need for Lassen to go on this mission, but he was determined to be at the head of his patrol, leading by example. He divided his force into 2, with the small unit being commanded by Stelling. Lassen planned to land some 3,000 yards from the town. To the left and right, shadowy figures were hastily securing the boats. Each man grabbed his weapon. They'd gone about 500 yards when a cry rang out in the darkness. Who goes there? Fishermen on our way home, said Fred Green. Come here. Green had no option but to step forward onto the road. Immediately a machine opened fire. To Lassen's rear, agonised cries rent the darkness. He knew it was time for decisive action. He crawled forward, threw a grenade, then another at the bunker, where the deadly MG-42 Spandau was positioned. He then rushed forward and sprayed the position with fire, killing the gunners at close quarters. It was murderous. 4 Germans lay dead at his feet. Further up the road were 2 more MG-42 bunkers. The road was being raked by storms of lead, 8mm rounds snapping and buzzing like demented hornets. It meant that 6 Spandaus were in action against Lassen's patrol. It was murder, but that didn't stop the Danish Viking. Lassen rose again, sprinting ahead, reaching the next bunker. Again, he hurled his grenades through the gun slip. There was a punching blast. Fire and smoke billowed out of the narrow opening, followed by the strangled screams of the dying inside. Lassen's voice rose above the quiet, yelling to his men, "Forward, forward, you bastards!" Shadowy figures rushed to join him, but as Lassen led his men forward, the darkness erupted into blinding points of burning light. Another of Lassen's men was blown off his feet. Wounded men fell to the roadside. 3 of Lassen's men lay dead. Many more were injured. He crawled back to his men, grabbed more grenades. He turned back to the battle. He had 2 men with him, Sean O'Reilly and Sergeant Major Stevens. The 3 men crawled ahead under a murderous hail of bullets. When they were within range for his exceptional throwing arm, Lassen let fly with grenades. A lonely cry floated from the darkness. "Kamerad, kamerad, friend." Moments later, the ghostly cloth was hung out of the bunker's opening, the white flag of surrender. Lassen rose to a crouch and scuttled forward, stopping a few yards short of the German flag, and in German ordered them to come out. The only answer was a savage burst of machine gun fire. Even as he fell, blasting through his final grenade through the gun slip, the explosion ripped apart the bunker, and the two Spandau's finally fell silent. From his position, Stevenson had heard the staccato burst of rounds. A Viking death. As the echoes died away, a long ringing silence fell across the bloody road, and then Stevenson heard it, a distinctive cry for help. Major Lassen wounded. Stevenson dashed forward and found the Dane lying on his back. Wounded, he knelt and lifted Lassen half up. Who is it? Lassen asked, dazed. It's me, Stevenson. I'm wounded, Steve. I'm going to die. Try and get the others out. Steve felt around in his side pouch, grabbed a morphine tablet and fed it into Lassen's mouth, saying, don't worry, Andy, you're going to be okay. We'll get you back to the boats. Lassen shook his head. It's no use, Steve. I'm dying. Don't go any further. Leave me and trying to get away with the others. Pretty much the moment he uttered those last words, Anders Lassen lost consciousness. Steve and the others carried Lassen's bloody form down the road until they again came under devastating bursts of fire. It was shortly after 3 a.m. on April 9, 1945, when the first of Lassen's patrol made it back to Cassoni Caldera. 4 of those who set out were dead: Corporal Ted Phillips, Fusilier Wally Hughes, Fred Couch, and Major Anders Lassen. Many more were missing. Anders Lassen died a few months short of his 25th birthday. Operation Rose was the last mission by the SBS in World War II. Once across Camacho, through the Argenta Gap, the British 8th Army thundered north, reaching Venice by late April. On April 28th, a high-ranking German officer arrived at Field Marshal Alexander's headquarters to discuss terms for surrender. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe was declared over. For his part in Operation Rose, Lassen's final action, he was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. He's the only member of Britain's SAS ever to have won that award. The VC citation stated, War Office, September 7, 1945. In Italy, on the night of April 8th, 9th, 1945, Major Lassen was ordered to take out a patrol of 1 officer and 17 other ranks to raid the north shore of Lake Camacho. His tasks were to cause as many casualties and as much confusion as possible to give the impression of a major landing and to capture prisoners. In previous reconnaissance was possible, and the party found itself on a narrow road flanked on both sides by water. Preceded by 2 scouts, Major Lassen led his men along the road towards the town. They were challenged after 500 yards from a position on the side of the road. An attempt to allay suspicion by answering that they were fishermen returning home failed. For when moving forward again to overpower the sentry, machine gun fire started from the position, also from 2 blockhouses to the rear. Major Lassen himself attacked with grenades and annihilated the first position, containing 4 Germans and 2 machine guns. Ignoring the hail of bullets sweeping the road from 3 enemy positions, an additional 1 having come into action from 300 yards down the road, he raced forward to engage the second position under covering fire from the remainder of the force. Throwing in more grenades, he silenced this position, which was then overrun by his patrol. 2 enemies were killed, 2 captured, and 2 more machine guns silent. By this time the force had suffered casualties, and its firepower was very considerably reduced. Still under heavy fire, Major Lassen rallied and reorganised his force and brought his fire to bear on the 3rd position. Moving forward himself, he flung in more grenades which produced a cry of "Camarade." He then went forward to within 3 or 4 yards of the position to order the enemy outside and to take their surrender. While shouting to them to come out, he was hit by a burst of Spandauer fire from the left of the position, and he fell mortally wounded. But even while falling, he flung a grenade, wounding some of the occupants, and enabling his patrol to dash in and capture this final position. Major Lassen refused to be evacuated, as he said it would impede the withdrawal and endanger further lives, and as ammunition was nearly exhausted, the force had to withdraw. By his magnificent leadership and complete disregard for his personal safety, Major Lassen had, in the face of overwhelming superiority, achieved his objectives. 3 positions were wiped out, accounting for 6 machine guns, killing 8 and wounding others of the enemy, and 2 prisoners were taken. The high sense of devotion to duty and the esteem in which he was held by the men he led added to his own magnificent courage, and enabled Major Lassen to carry out all the tasks he had been given with complete success. A citation of Anders Lassen's 3rd Military Cross. Major Anders Frederick Emil Victor Charles Lassen, VC, MC and 2 bars, born September 22nd, 1920, died April 9th, 1945, was a Danish military officer who was the only non-Commonwealth recipient of the Victoria Cross during World War II. Serving in the British Army, he was posthumously awarded the award for his actions during Operation Rose on April 8, 1945, at Lake Comacchio in Italy in the final weeks of the Italian campaign. Lassen was ordered to lead a raid that would give the impression that a major landing was being undertaken. Lassen fulfilled his mission by destroying 3 enemy positions before being mortally wounded. As his men's lives would be endangered in the withdrawal, he refused to be evacuated from the area. The King has been graciously pleased to approve the posthumous award of a Victoria Cross to Major Anders Frederick Emil Victor Charles Lassen, MC. Fittingly, his body was retrieved by Don Francesco Mariano, the priest of Comacchio town, and very close by where he fought his final battle, alongside those brother warriors who had fallen with him